Oui, merci Robert, messieurs, mesdames, ladies and gentlemen. I was allowed to speak in the language of French-German cooperation, which is of course English, and I'm really pleased that the AMF has taken the initiative to concentrate on sustainable finance today and has chosen this ce lieu de croissance au marble. However, I do believe this is really the right topic, and I first of all would like to stress how grateful I am, how much the AMF, but also the French government has done in order to promote sustainable finance on the European level. As a German Green in the European Parliament, I often felt much better represented when it came to that issue by the French government than by my own government. It was very often the French government which supported in the European Council more decisive measures. And I also know that in some Board of Supervisor meetings, when it came to sustainable finance, activism was not so much shared by the BaFin, and often they need some encouragement by their French colleagues. So, and this is really needed because we are at a crucial moment in history. As you all know, as the Accord de Paris takes the name and holds the name of this city, we don't have a lot of time left. So actually our global carbon budget is running out in less than 10 years. We have to change rapidly. And that means no sector of society can say, this is not for us. Logically, finance can only finance profitable projects. Unprofitable projects cannot be financed through the financial sector. And therefore, it is so important that public policy takes the necessary means to make green investment profitable. And on that basis, green finance can really flourish. And therefore, I see a natural alliance between environmental movements and financial services and industry. Because if we speed up the green transformation of our industries, it will lead to a higher investment rate. And a higher investment rate means more business for banks, insurances, investment funds, and so on. Therefore, Greens in the European Parliament and in national parliaments and governments need the help of the financial sector to win some of the crucial debates of environmental regulation. Because only if we price risks properly, if we have strict rules how to produce energy, how to reorganize our mobility, how to change the way how we insulate businesses and how often we turn over industrial products, and so on and so forth. Only if we have good rules, we will have green finance. But however, beyond this question of the regulatory side and the pricing of CO2, there's also things finance can do itself. And therefore, we can create and try whatever we can in order to build a sustainable financial sector. And for this, we have done a lot. And there is currently also a debate to start with on the role of central banking. And I was grateful that Christine Lagarde, during her nomination hearing in the European Parliament, has made very much clear that she is open to build and use the European Central Bank in order to green, first of all, the activities of the central bank, but also use monetary policy tools. You might not be surprised that as a German, I'm not in favor of printing the money to finance green investment. But I believe that monetary policy has a role to play. And quite opposite to what we heard from the Bundesbank, I think it is important when you buy assets, then you have to take also responsibility for the carbon dimension of this buying of financial assets. And when you do refinancing operations, then you also have to make sure that carbon risks and environmental risks are properly factored in. Monetary policy can therefore also play a role, and I'm welcoming if Christine Lagarde will change course here. Beyond that, of course, there is key legislative measures in Europe. And I remember still well that in 2016, during the nomination hearing of Commissioner Dombrovskis, he committed on my question to develop a sustainable finance agenda for Europe. He committed himself and he kept the promise. By December 2016, the high-level working group on sustainable finance had taken up its work. The work of the high-level group contributed substantially to the ambitious action plan of the European Commission, which was put forward in March 2018. And several legislative proposals came directly in the same year. Since then, we have seen several of the proposals taking shape. The first piece of legislation to be completed was the Sustainable Benchmarks Regulation in March 2019. It defines 2 new benchmarks for deep green companies already aligned with the Paris Agreement, and a second one for companies who make efforts to get aligned with Paris. 1 month later, followed the conclusion of the Disclosure Regulation. This piece of legislation ensures that financial markets participants are transparent about the integration of sustainability risks in their investment decisions. Financial advisors are obliged to publish how they include ESG preferences in their investment advice. But the last and most fundamental piece of legislation of the first action plan is, of course, the taxonomy. This is currently in institutional negotiations and will hopefully be completed soon, preferably under the Finnish presidency. Let me make a few remarks about this key piece of legislation. In my view, defining what is sustainable is decisive to make the whole sustainable finance framework credible and successful. And this can be the centerpiece to make Europe the lead market for sustainable finance globally. Currently, we are finishing a taxonomy of economic activities related to climate and environment. I see some benefits in the Council's approach of not only defining deep green activities, but also those related to the transition and those enabling truly green investments. If we introduce such shades of green, to allow me that joke, it is, however, crucial for investor confidence that the different categories are made clearly distinguishable. It is key to advance now with the environmental taxonomy, but taxonomies for social and governance should follow soon. When it comes to activities not considered sustainable by the envisaged taxonomy, we are unable to differentiate between those economic activities which are harmful and those which are neutral with respect to the environment. A further development of the taxonomy might be needed in order to provide this highly relevant transparency. I cannot spare you my comments regarding the question of nuclear energy. The technical expert group has recommended in their report on the taxonomy to exclude nuclear energy from sustainable financial products on the basis of the no harms principle. I concur with this analysis. Regardless what one thinks about nuclear power, the reputation of green financial markets and products must not be burdened with this controversial issue. Nuclear will always find financing if member states want so, without the need for being declared sustainable. But it would be impossible to sell green financial products credibly in Germany that include the nuclear energy dimension. And therefore, I really urge La France, please let us not misuse this issue of sustainable finance to have our debate how to best waste money in energy production. We can continue to disagree on this issue. But please, if we have a definition of sustainable finance, which will lead to NGOs campaigning in some key member states such as Germany, Austria, and Italy against these products because they contain a form of energy which is so controversial, La France would do the harm to the whole European project of sustainable finance it did so much to create. And therefore, please let's choose another space for this debate, which will continue. When discussing the legislative initiatives to green financial markets, we tend to forget those achievements that do not stem from the Commission's initial legislative package. I would like to briefly highlight that already in the Directive on Occupational Pensions, IORP2, in 2016, we obliged occupational pension funds to disclose where ecological and social factors are considered in their decision-making. Subsequently, we included disclosure of ESG risks for large banks and asset managers in legislative reviews earlier this year. In the context of the banking package, the EBA will prepare a report on binding capital requirements under Pillar 1 and also bank-specific capital surcharges under Pillar 2 related to ESG risks. And finally, in the review of the European Financial Supervisors, the ESAs, we included a mandate for the monitoring of ESG risks in financial markets. These were progress which we fought hard as Greens in the European Parliament, and we found large majorities and afterwards also the support of the Council. The beginning of the new parliamentary term now is a good moment to take stock and shift the focus to a wider picture. First of all, on my renewed question, Mr. Dombrovskis has promised a second phase of his Sustainable Finance Action Plan. And this means, of course, that to finish first the old agenda, in particular based on the taxonomy, a consumer label, and equally a green bond standard. And this green bond standard is also expected to be proposed by the Commission soon. In parallel to the consumer label, it can help investors to choose truly sustainable investments. In contrast to the proposals by the technical expert group, the bond standard should go beyond existing industry standards such as the green bond principles in order to have a real added value. It should be binding in the way that whoever wants to make use of the label has to follow specific requirements. We need transparency on the use of proceeds, ideally at project level, in order to win the confidence of those investors concerned about ethical standards. Apart from these single missing pieces, we are increasingly looking into the consistency and coherence of the overall framework in sustainable finance. It will be one of our main work streams to harmonize the disclosure requirements which were created over the last years for different actors and sectors. To make sustainable finance deliver, we need comparable and quantifiable information from very different actors. This harmonization should be done on the basis of the taxonomy and its indicators. Crucial for the meaningful application of the taxonomy is information provided in non-financial reporting. However, the minimum harmonization of the current non-financial reporting directive provides information that is neither standardized nor comparable. But green financial products must rest on a good, deep, and precise information. It is therefore key for the Commission to propose a review of the non-financial reporting directive, standardizing reporting and indicators. And these should be aligned with the taxonomy to allow for real consistency. Because only if transparency of all major companies is granted, environmental, social, and governance risks can be factored in correctly. In my view, the issue of proportionality goes beyond ESG reporting and should be considered in a cross-cutting way when designing sustainable finance. When it comes to banks, for instance, it would be difficult to make them inquiring about the ESG risks of every small loan on their books in order to disclose the bank's overall ESG risks. The EBA's work on the methodology for the disclosure of ESG risks by large banks as mandated by the reviewed CRR should deliver first results in this direction. A differentiation of actors along the sectors of the taxonomy and company size seems imperative. As currently envisaged, the taxonomy will solely regulate the green niche. This design risks to asymmetrically burden those actors which already make an effort towards ESG transparency and the green transition. I therefore argue for broadening the application of the taxonomy in a way so that in the long run, all larger providers have to be fully transparent about the sustainability of their balance sheet and products. This means we cannot rest only with banks and occupational pensions, but have to mainstream this into insurance and large investment funds. This would allow sustainable finance to have a substantial role to play in the transition of a sustainable economy and the achievement of the Paris Agreement. Regulators and supervisors, like the three ESAs, including the AMF, of course, continue to have a crucial role to play in sustainable finance. They have the task of monitoring ESG risks in financial markets, developing methodologies for the disclosure of ESG risks of financial actors, or integrating ESG in stress tests in order to name only a few. With their role in regulation and supervision, they are key in putting the work of the co-legislators in practice. Supervisors shape new methods and practices that will change the functioning of financial markets. I'm looking forward to a continuously good cooperation on our way to make financial markets more stable and sustainable. Our children remind us every Friday what we have to do. It is our obligation now to green the financial sector, understanding that greening the financial sector rests on winning a lot of policy debates in all the different areas. I'm pleased that the new Commission President-elect has promised to sharpen our CO2 ambition for the next 5 years to come with this so-called Green Deal. And I hope the financial sector all over Europe will see this not as a threat, but as a growth opportunity. And this is the collaboration we will need in order to win the difficult policy debates with some of the sectors who have more to risk when it comes to the transition towards a green economy. But I'm, in the end, convinced that the greening of our economy will be an innovation agenda from which Europe can win economically, socially, and also in terms of identity. Because if Europe becomes the first region of the world which manages to reconcile a good life and also economic prosperity with the respect of the limits of our planet, this could give a new sense to European integration and the pride in the European project. And this is what Europe needs at the moment, being faced with populism and nationalism all over the place. And I hope for your continued engagement in this direction. Robert, thank you. Thank you very much for all.